Welcome, beautiful souls. Hit subscribe to join us on this amazing journey. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and the time in your country. Like the video to support our channel. Christmas was a magical time for me and my 8-year-old son, Mark. 3 years ago when this happened, Mark was only 5 and I was 27. As a single mom, I always tried to make Christmas special for him. That year we had been out Christmas shopping, enjoying the festive atmosphere at the local mall. After a long day of shopping for gifts, we grabbed some burgers and ice cream at McDonald's before heading out through the south exit of the mall. That's where we encountered a man dressed as Santa. He waved at us, called out the usual cheerful greetings, and knelt down to speak to Mark. He asked what Mark wanted for Christmas, and my little boy eagerly replied, "A Nintendo Switch." Ironically, it was exactly what I had planned to get him. The Santa laughed, saying, "If you're good, maybe you'll get it." He then looked up at me, gave a wink, and added a compliment about how Mark's mom, me, was a looker. Though slightly uncomfortable, I brushed it off as harmless, smiled, and engaged in light conversation. But things quickly took a weird turn. As we were about to leave, he leaned closer and joked, "Mark, have you ever heard the song I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus?" Then, to my utter shock, he leaned in as if expecting a kiss on the cheek. But just as I leaned forward to give a polite peck, he turned his head, attempting to kiss me on the lips. I pulled back instantly, my stomach churning. He laughed in a way that was anything but jolly. I grabbed Mark's hand and walked away, calling over my shoulder, "Merry Christmas." We left the mall, but as I drove past the south exit, I noticed that Santa was no longer standing there. I didn't think much of it at the time, but I should have. Later that evening, Mark and I were home, cozy in our living room, watching a Christmas movie. The warm atmosphere was suddenly interrupted by the doorbell ringing. My heart skipped a beat. It was late, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I told Mark to stay on the couch and approached the door cautiously. "Who is it?" I called. A deep voice replied, "It's Santa." Panic shot through me. I demanded he leave, threatening to call the police. But the man persisted, saying, "You dropped something out of your bag, miss. I just want to return it." I asked what I had supposedly dropped, and his response was vague, making it clear he was lying. I yelled at him again to leave. Instead of complying, he shouted, "Ho, ho, ho," and began laughing outside. Terrified, I called the mall's management office to report the encounter. To my horror, they informed me they didn't officially hire any Santa performers. At this point, I called the police, who came to my house and took a report. Their presence gave me some reassurance, but I couldn't shake the fear. A few nights later, the doorbell rang again, this time even later. Mark was asleep, and I was alone in the living room. I froze, my stomach knotting in fear. The doorbell didn't ring again, but the next morning I found a typed note taped to the door. It read, "I'm sure you can guess who this is. I didn't mean to scare you. You and your son are adorable, and I'd love to be a part of your family. I already know where you live, so just give me your number." I felt sick. The note even included his phone number. I immediately called the police, providing them with the note. A few days later, a detective informed me the man had been dealt with and assured me he wouldn't contact me again. I haven't heard from him since. That Christmas remains a chilling reminder of how dangerous the world can be, even during the most wonderful time of the year. Christmas Eve is one of my earliest and most vivid childhood memories, and not for the reasons you might expect. At 6 years old, I had just moved into a new home with my family, and like most kids my age, I was obsessed with Christmas. The excitement of presents and the mystery of Santa always kept me awake late into the night. That evening I was in my room playing a Star Wars game on my old box TV. The house was quiet, with my parents and sister already asleep. Around midnight, I decided to sneak to the bathroom, careful not to wake anyone. I muted my game, tiptoed out of my room, and made my way down the hall to the upstairs bathroom. On my way back, as I passed the stairs, I heard a faint rustling sound coming from the living room downstairs. It sounded like the Christmas tree was moving. My heart raced with excitement. My first thought was, Santa. He was here, just like in all the stories. Curiosity got the better of me. I crept down the stairs as quietly as possible, trying not to make a sound. When I reached the bottom, I peeked around the wall into the living room. The only light in the room came from the soft glow of the tree's Christmas lights, casting shadows across the room. That's when I saw him. A man was crouched behind the tree, holding a flashlight in one hand and a black bag in the other. He wasn't wearing a Santa suit or even red clothing, just a dark jacket and jeans. My heart sank. This wasn't Santa. As he stood up, he noticed me immediately. I froze in terror, unsure of what to do. He brought his finger to his lips and whispered, "Shh. It's okay, I'm Santa." I wasn't fooled. Even at 6 years old, I knew this wasn't right. Without thinking, I screamed as loudly as I could. "Mom! Dad! There's a man in the house!" The man panicked. He grabbed the black bag and looked at the door, hesitating as if deciding whether to run with it or leave it behind. My screams grew louder, and within seconds, my parents came rushing down the stairs. The man dropped the bag and bolted for the front door, slamming it behind him as he fled into the night. My dad immediately ran outside in his slippers, yelling into the darkness. But the man was gone. My mom held me tightly as I cried, too frightened to explain what I had seen. When things calmed down, we examined the black bag he had left behind. Inside were ornaments from our tree, family heirlooms, handcrafted decorations, and sentimental pieces my mom had collected over the years. It wasn't just a bag of Christmas ornaments. It was a bag of memories. My dad inspected the house and found the back door damaged. The wood around the lock had been splintered, suggesting the man had used a crowbar to break in. We later learned from the news that another home in the neighborhood had been burglarized that night, likely by the same man. Thankfully, we hadn't lost anything, and the man hadn't harmed anyone. But the incident left a lasting scar. For years, I couldn't sleep on Christmas Eve without feeling anxious, and the sound of rustling pine needles brought back vivid flashes of that night. Looking back now, I realize how lucky we were. That man wasn't Santa, but he taught me a lesson I'll never forget. Even the magic of Christmas can't protect us from the dangers of the real world. It was December 2020, a time when the festive spirit of Christmas lit up our neighborhood. My fiancé and I had recently bought a house in a quiet suburban area, perfect for starting a family someday. Our neighbors were friendly, and the street glowed with Christmas lights. But what happened 2 years ago left a permanent shadow over that cheerful image. Our neighbor Paul lived next door. He was a quiet man in his 40s who kept to himself. While friendly enough when we spoke, he rarely lingered for conversations. As Christmas approached, everyone on the block had put up their decorations, including Paul. I found it surprising that a single man with no family would bother putting up lights, but it seemed festive, so I admired it. One evening, as I was putting up our decorations, I noticed Paul's Christmas lights flickering erratically. It wasn't the kind of programmed flicker you'd expect from modern lights. It was strange, almost glitchy. I thought it might be faulty wiring and made a mental note to mention it to him. The next morning, I noticed something else. Paul's car hadn't moved in days, and his blinds were shut tight. Even at night, when his lights were on, the blinds remained drawn. I joked to my fiancé that maybe Paul was hibernating for the winter. The flickering lights continued the next night. My fiancé pointed it out as unusual, so I decided to check on Paul. I knocked on his door, but there was no response. I rang the bell and waited. Finally, the door creaked open, and Paul appeared, looking pale and disheveled. I told him about the flickering lights. He seemed surprised, but thanked me for letting him know. Then I heard it, a faint, muffled cry coming from somewhere inside the house. It sounded like a child. Paul didn't have kids. My heart raced, but I kept calm. "Did you hear that?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Hear what?" he replied quickly, his expression unreadable. Not wanting to provoke him, I nodded politely, said goodnight, and walked back to my house. As soon as I was inside, I told my fiancée what I'd heard. She looked at me in disbelief, but the unease in my voice convinced her. I decided to call the police and report what I'd heard, explaining that it sounded like a child screaming and that Paul didn't have any kids. When the police arrived, they knocked on Paul's door. He hesitated but eventually let them in. What they found still haunts me. A young boy was locked in Paul's basement. He had been missing for 4 days, abducted from a neighboring town. The boy had managed to find a way to flicker Paul's Christmas lights as a desperate signal for help. His cleverness likely saved his life. The boy's family had been frantically searching for him, and his return was a miracle. Paul was arrested immediately. The police later informed me that the boy had been lured to Paul's car under the pretense of helping him with holiday decorations. Once inside, Paul had kidnapped him and locked him in the basement. The thought of that poor child enduring such horror only a few feet away from us made me sick. As for the flickering lights, it was the boy's desperate attempt to attract attention. He had figured out how to manipulate the wiring from the basement, flickering the lights whenever he saw someone outside through the small, partially obscured basement window. When I visited Paul's door that night, the boy must have seen me and seized his chance. The neighborhood has never been the same since. Paul is serving a lengthy prison sentence, but the memory of his flickering lights remains a chilling reminder of the evil that can hide behind closed doors, even during the season of joy. It was the middle of December, and Christmas was just around the corner. I was home alone for the weekend, so my girlfriend Jenny came over to keep me company. The plan was simple: cozy up by the Christmas tree, watch festive movies, and enjoy some wine. The house was quiet, filled with the warm glow of the holiday lights, and we were watching Elf when we ran out of wine. I offered to run to the nearby liquor store to grab another bottle, leaving Jenny in the living room. The trip was quick. I chatted briefly with the cashier, but my phone buzzed in my pocket mid-conversation. It was Jenny. Her voice was shaky as she whispered, "I'm hearing noises from the crawl space beneath the living room." I reassured her it was nothing, probably just the house settling or the wind, but she insisted, asking me to stay on the phone until I got back. 5 minutes later, I was home, and Jenny was still sitting on the couch looking tense. She told me the noises had stopped but begged me to check the crawl space. I grabbed a flashlight from the closet and opened the small door leading to the crawl space. The air was cold and musty, and a faint, acrid smell, like urine, hit me immediately. The space was filled with boxes, old furniture, and other forgotten junk, making it hard to see much. I scanned the area with my flashlight, but nothing seemed out of place. Still, the smell made me uneasy. Just as I was climbing back out, I heard something. A soft shuffling noise from deep within the crawl space. My pulse quickened. I froze, staring into the darkness, but saw nothing. Not wanting to risk whatever it might be, a raccoon, a stray cat, or something worse. I shut the door and decided to deal with it later. Jenny was visibly uncomfortable as I explained that there might be an animal down there. I told her I'd ask my dad to call pest control in the morning, and we returned to watching the movie. We laughed nervously and tried to shrug it off, but the atmosphere felt different now. Even the warmth of the Christmas lights couldn't shake the eerie feeling. Later that night, we went to bed. Sometime around 2 a.m., I woke up with a pounding headache and an urgent need to use the bathroom. I opened the bedroom door, and as my eyes adjusted to the darkness of the hallway, I froze. At the end of the hall, silhouetted by the faint glow of the Christmas tree downstairs, was a figure, a person. I nearly screamed, but fear paralyzed me. I quickly stepped back into the bedroom, locked the door, and woke Jenny. "There's someone in the house," I whispered. Her eyes widened in terror as we heard slow, deliberate footsteps approaching the door. The doorknob rattled, and then a deep, gravelly voice spoke from the other side. "Hello?" it said, drawn out and unsettling. Jenny screamed, and the voice chuckled before we heard the footsteps retreat. I immediately called 911, whispering into the phone as we stayed locked in the room. The wait for the police felt like an eternity, but the house eventually fell silent again. When the officers arrived, they searched every corner but found no one. However, when they entered the crawl space, they found evidence someone had been living there. A pile of tattered blankets, food wrappers, and even a bucket used as a toilet confirmed our worst fears. The smell I had noticed earlier wasn't from an animal, it was from him. The intruder had likely been in the house for days, maybe weeks. How he got in, we weren't sure, but the experience left us shaken. I never forgot to lock the doors again, and to this day, I can't sit in a quiet house without wondering if someone else might be hiding just out of sight. The first snowfall of December painted the town in a pristine white blanket. Houses glowed with Christmas lights, and the neighborhood buzzed with holiday cheer. For a single mother like Mia, it was a season of both joy and stress. Her 8-year-old son, Ethan, adored everything about Christmas, from the lights to the carols. But this year, something felt off. Mia lived in a quiet cul-de-sac, surrounded by friendly neighbors she'd known for years. Her house, though charming, had an odd feature: a small, unused shed in the backyard. It was left there by the previous owners and hadn't been touched in years. Ethan often joked that it was haunted, but Mia always laughed it off. One snowy evening after a day of errands, Mia and Ethan returned home to find footprints leading from the sidewalk to the shed. They weren't hers, and they certainly weren't Ethan's. They were large, deep, and freshly imprinted in the snow. "Did someone come to fix the shed?" Ethan asked, his voice tinged with curiosity and unease. "No, honey," Mia replied, trying to mask her own discomfort. "It's probably just the neighbor checking something." Still, she couldn't ignore the strange feeling creeping up her spine. She locked the house carefully that night, double-checking every window and door. Later that evening, as Ethan was brushing his teeth, Mia decided to take a closer look at the shed. Armed with her phone's flashlight and a thick coat, she trudged through the snow. The footprints were oddly spaced, as if the person had been limping or dragging one foot. When she reached the shed, she noticed the padlock was missing. The doors were slightly ajar, revealing a dark, musty interior. "Hello," she called out hesitantly, shining her light inside. The shed was empty, or so it seemed. Dust-covered tools hung on the walls, and a pile of old tarps lay in one corner. She stepped in cautiously, her breath visible in the cold air. As her flashlight scanned the room, she noticed something chilling: a half-eaten sandwich and an empty water bottle tucked behind the tarps. Someone had been there. Mia's heart raced as she backed out of the shed and slammed the door shut. She quickly ran back to the house, locking the back door behind her. She didn't want to scare Ethan, so she decided not to mention it. The following morning, Ethan was playing in the living room when he noticed something unusual in the snow outside. From the window, he could see another set of footprints leading away from the shed, this time heading toward their house. "Mama, look!" he called. Mia joined him at the window, her stomach sinking. The footprints stopped at their back door. Someone had been there while they were asleep. She called the police, who arrived within the hour. The officer inspected the footprints in the shed. "It looks like someone's been squatting here," he said. "We'll patrol the area tonight, but keep your doors locked. If you see anything suspicious, call us immediately." Mia thanked him, but her anxiety only grew. She spent the rest of the day trying to distract Ethan with holiday crafts and movies, but her eyes kept darting to the windows. The thought of someone watching them was unbearable. That night, after Ethan had gone to bed, Mia settled in the living room with a cup of tea. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the heater. She tried to relax, but every creak and groan of the house set her on edge. Around midnight, a faint tapping sound broke the silence. It was coming from the back door. Mia froze, her breath hitching. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. Summoning her courage, she crept toward the door and peeked through the peephole. Nothing. Her heart was pounding as she backed away. Just as she turned to head upstairs, a loud bang echoed through the house. The sound had come from the living room window. Mia's blood ran cold as she realized someone was trying to break in. She grabbed her phone and ran to Ethan's room, locking the door behind her. Whispering for him to stay quiet, she called 911. The operator assured her that officers were on their way. Minutes felt like hours as they huddled in the corner of the room. Mia strained to hear any movement downstairs. Then came the sound of heavy footsteps in the hall. Whoever it was, they were inside the house. Mia's mind raced. She couldn't let whoever it was find them. She quietly opened the window in Ethan's room, thankful for the fresh snowfall that muffled the sound. Carefully, she lowered Ethan out first, then climbed out herself. They landed in the soft snow and hurried to a neighbor's house. Just as they reached the neighbor's porch, they heard a loud crash from their own house. Mia turned to see the faint glow of a flashlight moving through the windows. Whoever had broken in was searching for them. The neighbors let them in, and moments later, the police arrived. The officers entered Mia's house, and after what felt like an eternity, they came out with a man in handcuffs. He was disheveled, with wild eyes and clothes caked in dirt. "He's been living in your shed for weeks," one of the officers explained. "We found more food wrappers and bedding in there. It looks like he broke in tonight looking for something, or someone." Mia was shaken, but relieved that the man was caught. The police assured her he would be charged with trespassing and breaking and entering. They also promised to keep an eye on the neighborhood. Ethan struggled to sleep for days after the incident, and Mia couldn't blame him. She herself would lie awake at night, jumping at every sound. Eventually, they had the shed torn down, hoping to erase the memory of what had happened. But even now, years later, Mia can't forget the man's footprints in the snow or the shadow she saw that night. The holiday season may bring joy and light, but for Mia and Ethan,